Matt Kahn, thank you for being here today, and you're mostly welcome to Livsenergi-podden.
It's such an honor as always.
So we just had a brief discussion before we started recording, and we were quite laughing about how we have loads of books at home and we don't use them as we intend to. So what's about the books that you have in your home that you don't use?
Well, I have a cookbook collection and I'm very much into cooking. And I have cookbooks for references, whether it's different styles of food, different cultures. And the intention is that once a week I pull a cookbook and I learn a new recipe every week. But I tend to channel my recipes like I do my teachings. And so I have this whole library that I kind of say, it's called One of These Days. That's the whole cookbook collection. One of these days I'll read. But I come up with so many recipes from the same place I channel my teachings. And it just tends to be the way I cook and teach myself how to cook is just through my own intuition. And it's something that I love doing. And it's something that helps balance my life in between speaking on stage and, of course, writing books. So,
Yeah. You have written quite a few now. Is it 4 or more?
yeah,
4.
4.
Yeah. So we have the first one. It's called Whatever Arises, Love That.
Mhm.
I told you before, I love the title, but I haven't read the book.
Oh,
I
me
should.
neither.
Right.
I wrote it, I didn't read it, but it's a classic. It's I love all the books I've written, but that one was the first, and it just is such a great companion for those of us in the world that want to love ourselves more, but really don't know where to start. So it's a tremendous starting point. And I feel like when I wrote my most recent book, I felt like, we start with whatever rises, love that. And I have a couple other books. And then the one I
You
just
can show
wrote.
them.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, please.
The second one. This is the
Yeah, second one.
yeah.
I love
Third
that.
one.
And the third
This is
one,
it.
yeah, all great. Oh, I love this. The
Mm.
fourth one, the new one, I feel like is just taking the self-love path and deepening it and broadening it so that really, whether we're speaking to ourselves or we're speaking to other people, how do we speak and connect from a place where we don't need other people to know what we know spiritually? And how do we interact with people from the awareness that we're all really on a healing journey? And most people don't even really know they're on a healing journey. So it's almost as if I thought this new book was almost like the sequel to Whatever Rises, Love That. And
Mhm.
it's just a way for us to learn how to allow self-love to really transform the way we communicate with ourselves and other people, and I'm incredibly proud of it.
You should be. All of
Mhm.
your books are fantastic, and I know that our audience in the book club, they really like your books.
Oh, that means a lot to
Yeah.
me. Thank you,
Mm.
book club. I love you all, and it's truly an honor, when I sit down to write a book, it's truly it's such a meaningful process for me, and, it has to be about what have I not said, because I don't like to repeat things, and I like to write a book as if I'm writing from the perspective of this is the last book I'll ever write, so I can put all of myself into it, and this most recent book, I go more personal than I've ever gone before, and I use it as a way so that people can find themselves in the journey I share, and then such practical tools and tips and practices, so we all can not just know a deep truth, but how do we actually bring it to life within all areas of our life? And again, I'm just so grateful and excited to share it with you and to share it with this beautiful part of the world.
Yeah, thank you. So, Matt, talking about the book, it's called All for Love.
Yes.
The title of it could make you think about a romantic love between people, but this
Sure.
is not it.
Right. I mean, it certainly would be a great guide to learn how to teach beloved partners how to communicate better. So
Oh,
in that
yeah,
aspect, but
I'm using it.
yeah, thank you, and I have as well. But when I say all for love, some people can hear that and think of it as a romantic connotation. Um, all for love, for me, the meaning is that love is the perfume that we transmit when our spirit has been fully awakened. And so when I say all for love, my intention, my life work is that I do everything for the love that is uplifting this planet and healing humanity. And as we in our own ways discover how we can live all for love, all for the unity of the planet, all for the healing of all beings, all for the awakening of consciousness, without it having to be this pressure of like, oh God, I have to live up to that each day and not
Mhm.
make it this ego um, performance. But how can we literally, we all know that love is the highest vibration. We know love is the highest value. And how do we start bringing that into our living realities, even when we're in moments that don't feel comfortable, convenient, or loving, or even overwhelming? How do we represent love in our lives? How do we transmit love for the well being of ourselves and other people? How do we truly step into being love in action? And then that's what this book really unpacks.
Mm. I mean, it's not an easy task to be
Right.
all love, right?
Well, and I think part of it, is that in order to be all for love,
Yeah.
right? Meaning I do everything for the love of myself or the love of other people. But I think that that's part of a confusing thing is it doesn't mean we have to feel love all the time.
Um,
It doesn't mean we're always going to act loving all the time. But
mm,
what it means is that we have an awareness that when we stray away from that consciousness, we have an awareness that brings us back to it. So what the universe always says, which I think is so beautiful, is the universe says we don't count how often people stray from their light. We only rejoice in how often you return and remember. And so it's just a beautiful way to really let people off the hook and to not make it this big thing to live up to, but like literally, if love is who we are at the core of our being, what type of journey can we go through to unravel what seems to get in the way of knowing and feeling it? And
mm,
so, all for love is really just an opportunity for us to really know who we truly are, to shine our light in a very authentic and effortless way,
mm.
and how to bring more love into our lives in the most simple and practical manner. And
Yeah.
so it's really again, I think people are going to be very surprised as to how quickly their life changes and how easy it is to implement this because it's just about creating a roadmap and giving people a way back to love.
Yeah. And the thing is, as with most of your books, you put it in a practical order we can follow. It's not too much information to chew before we can actually, resonate and also reflect on our own lives and get perspectives of from your life, and also um, adding that to our perception and changing our perception. So I like that very much. So you actually bring the 10 principles uh, in a good order. Would you like to tell us a little bit about the principles? How did you end up with those principles?
It was interesting because when I started to channel the book, I knew I was going to have 10, principles. And basically, the 10 principles are the values that we embody when we reclaim our power, either from the people we've given our power to or that seem to be taken from us as a result of trauma, loss, or some sort of unavoidable change we experienced in our upbringing. And so really the whole purpose of the book is to reclaim the power that seems to have been scattered in all directions as a result of early experiences. And really, as we reclaim our power, that's when we just become the all for love or love in action. And, I started kind of channeling mercy and reverence and all these different qualities. And what's interesting is what I'm channeling, I'm writing a list of all the things. I'm outlining the book and I'm teaching myself what the book's going to be while I'm also channeling it. So I'm channeling all these different, values, and I'm looking at it going, "Oh, this is interesting. I really like this compassion, forgiveness, mercy, reverence, all these." And at the same time I'm going, "Ooh, how am I going to distinguish one from the other?" And so
Mhm.
as I'm writing the book, I'm teaching myself while I'm writing it, which is a very unique process. And it just became this really incredible adventure to really dissect the importance of things like mercy, and how is that a building block to compassion, and the power of listening and patience. And if we really start to really look deeply at a lot of these qualities, we really start to find that all of the things that a lot of us spend so much time on the spiritual journey trying to be good at are actually things that already exist within us. It just seems to be obscured by the traumas, the memories, the hurts, and even the beliefs that we've created as a subconscious form of protection in the aftermath of those experiences. And if we can address that, which is why I wrote this book, we can heal those wounds,
Mhm.
then we don't have to practice being good at mercy or forgiveness. Those things are actually already fully available to us. It's just obscured by the pain that hasn't been healed. And so I wanted to write a book that helps us really heal a lot of these big themes in our lives so that instead of trying to practice being loving people, we can just rejoice in being the love that we are.
Mhm. So I get this vision
Yeah.
when you're speaking. So a little bit, it would be like looking out through when before we read this book, we're looking out through this very dirty window,
Yeah.
right? Or 10
Yes.
dirty windows. And for
Yeah.
every principle, or you didn't say character, you said qualities.
Qualities.
For
Yeah.
every quality, we clean the window and we can see clear.
That's
So
right.
that's a description that I would like to use for all of your books, because you tend to help me get perspective
Um,
on things, which is really helpful. And I know that your language is it's a bit unique, and I think the way you write it talks to me. It talks to the heart,
yeah.
and I love it. I hope everyone likes it.
When I write books, and I learned this very early on when I knew I was going to write books. I don't read books because I don't want other like of course I have such respect and honor for other people's material. I don't want their material influencing the way I structure sentences, the way I use words. Because the way I was taught to write, which, it's just something I do, it's as if the words and the way they're put together creates an energetic frequency that actually starts to offer the person reading it a healing while they're reading it. So sometimes people will read books, and this is just, this is one process. They'll read it, they'll understand it, they'll then try to apply it, and then results will come. But the way I was taught how to, or the way I was created to be as a healer, is that when I speak on stage or when I write, there's an energetic frequency that comes in. And that frequency is actually giving people the experience of what they're reading and actually taking them through the healing as the words are being read. And so for me, I always want to be able to speak and write in a way where people feel like, and I love what you just said, I'm speaking right to you. I'm speaking right to your heart. We're walking together on a journey and I'm escorting you from one level of consciousness to the next. And you're actually experiencing the healing that the words represent while you're reading them. So the healing occurs in real time. And that's just something I think that I was created to bring to this area of life. And it's just something that makes me so proud and grateful to be of services to so many is to really allow a book to be a living, breathing transmission of healing energy.
Mm. And the thing is, it's not a quick read, because since you are being educated
Yeah.
while reading, it
Mhm.
needs to, at least for me, it needs to,
Yeah.
drop down
Yeah.
all the way. So,
Absolutely.
and that's the way I like to read this kind of books, because at the end of the book, you feel new.
Oh, I love that. And it's such a an honor to hear reflected that, the intention I put into it is what's being experienced. And, you know, writing this book was actually the most personal experience of writing a book I've ever had. I remember as I was writing it and telling stories that came to me, it was such a cathartic experience for me. I found myself most of the time I wrote that book, I wrote it in about a month and a half, which is a very quick turnaround for me.
Yes.
But because when it's time to write a book, it's very fast. But when I was writing it, I spent most of the time just bawling my eyes out while I was writing it, and just it was such a transformation for me. And I think that the incredible transformation I experienced writing it has equally become the incredible transformation people have reading it. And what a great honor it is to be a part of writing a book that was so meaningful for me that is now being experienced by so many. I mean, it's breathtaking. So I love hearing that.
Good. So I was thinking,
Yeah.
is there a principle or a quality that feels more difficult for you than
Hmm.
the others? More difficult or more personal or both?
I think, well, I will say this because in my current life and the way it's been for a long time, the principles that I outline in the book is just how I live my life. And it's something I don't even think about. It's just the way I move through time and space. But I will say the most meaningful quality, if I look back in my life, that really was a shift in a profound direction for me
Mm.
was mercy. And the reason is that I had wonderful parents, I had a great family, and they all had their stuff like we all do, and we all triggered each other and had misunderstandings. And I think when I was young and I would experience what I would call mistreatment
Mm.
or unfairness,
Mm.
and then I would try to bring it to their attention. And of course, I could always be wrong, but they could never be wrong. And it was that kind of a structure.
Yeah.
And so because I had a legitimate claim to mistreatment, and because it technically is outrageously unfair to never have it validated when you bring it up to someone because you're the child and they're the parent.
Yeah.
I grew early in my life, I grew into this egoic belief that because I was mistreated and because this is unfair, I have a right to treat you back the way you treated me.
Mm.
And so as I grew up in my life and when I was in my, late teens, early 20s is really where a lot of my spirituality really woke up in me. When I realized that, yeah, you can believe that. You can believe, hey, you've been unfair to me, I can be unfair to you. And yet there's a level of fairness and justice beyond all cause and effect.
Mm.
And that I equally have an opportunity to treat someone the way they're not treating me
Mhm.
and to genuinely see how different of an experience I have in their presence when I'm being the change I want to see. And so when I decided to exchange my triggers and my impulses for retribution that I developed at a very early age, and it was never, it was never anything ridiculous. It was just this belief of, I deserve to be angry with you back. And when I handed all that over in exchange for mercy, and the way mercy woke up in me is that instead of seeing people being mean to me, I started to see and sense all the pain they carried,
Yeah.
and that it wasn't actually them in their highest truth or qualities treating me this way. It was they were taken over by their unprocessed pain. And then from mercy, that went to forgiveness, as I say in the book, where mercy is the not being, or forgiveness is not being okay with something or saying it's okay, this happened, but separating out who someone is by the unprocessed pain that motivates them.
Mm.
And when we can see the difference of every person is a soul expressing the uniqueness of source.
Mm.
At our core, we are all good people, But when we are being taken over and motivated by our unprocessed pain, we not only hurt ourselves, but we harm other people. And so as I began to move by the virtue of mercy, as I began to see the difference between who people are and the pain that overwhelms them, a wellspring of forgiveness woke up in me. And that forgiveness is what made right every pain I endured without forcing people in my family to give me what they don't even know how to give themselves. And so mercy and forgiveness both were two of the biggest transformers in my life.
Thank you for telling that story. You know, your story is unique for you, but I think a lot of people have experienced the same thing
Yes.
with the unfairness, and whether it's with your parents or with the other relatives or with friends or whatever it can be. But being the one who is mistreated from start, whether you believe that or if it's true or not, it's super hard to
Yes.
overcome yourself
Yes.
and choose mercy,
Right.
right? And being the first one. So you have to really overcome yourself to
You
take
do.
that very conscious decision.
Well, and the way I did it, I can share this with everyone who's watching this, because it wasn't just like a choice where I said, "Oh, I'm going to do this, and then my life's great." It was really, really quite a gritty path. And what I started to see, this is how I saw it, was I would, because I spent so much time when I was a kid observing and processing. I didn't even know what I was doing. I would meditate and didn't even know what meditation was. Like I did all these things, and I would just observe my family and observe myself before I knew what observing was. And I realized something very clear, and this is what created the shift for me. I said, okay, when they speak to me in an unfair way and then refuse to take responsibility, how does that feel in my body? And I would just feel that.
Mm.
Then I asked myself, and when you think of how unfair it is and that you have a right to treat them back that way, how does it feel in your body? And I found that it was the same feeling.
Exactly.
So what I realized at a very young age was, oh, if I believe that I have the right to retaliate, or if I feel like I have the right to any form of retribution, every time I think about that, I'm actually treating myself the way I don't want someone else to treat me. So I'm
Yeah.
actually helping their pain hurt me. And I realized that, oh, I am also someone who is mistreating me. And it took me years to figure that out. And so I would feel into my experience and say, okay, I don't feel good around this person the way they're treating me. But the one thing that I can do is be one less person harming me. And I found them that in order to be one less person harming me, I had to be able to learn how to give space without making myself an emotional doormat. It
Mhm.
didn't mean that I'm sitting here in acceptance and it's okay that you talk to me this way. I had to learn how to communicate differently. I had to learn how to have boundaries. But the one thing that I stopped doing was I stopped focusing on other people's shortcomings, because even before I realized the law of oneness, I realized that by focusing on other people's shortcomings, I feel just as bad in my body as when they're mistreating me. So it became this journey of, I can be aware, I can communicate, and I'll learn a new way of being, but I'm not going to be the one that continues to treat me the way I'm trying to help them stop doing to me. And it was just, it became a very clear revelation.
That's a very, very helpful, quick guide
Yeah.
to a new you. So I was when working with this book, it's actually on print right now, so I don't have it in my
Oh,
hand, but I know that you have seen it in a picture at least. So when processing this book into a book in Swedish, I realized for me at least, my interpretation is that what you're trying to do is that you're helping us
Mm,
see. I mean, so in real life, we tend to see, I think we have a tendency to meet people, the day,
mhm.
environment, with, you know, little dust between us.
Right,
Dust or dirt or, little gravels and stuff. So we see something not bad, but we see grayness instead of light
right.
first, like the first thing. So what you're trying to do with this book is to just take away everything that is between us so that we can see the light first. Then
Yes,
perhaps things happen on the way after that, but at least first of all, see the positive, see the light.
absolutely. I love how you describe that, and I think that the fear most people have is they think, well, if I just see their light, I'm going to be subject to mistreatment. I'm going to be taken advantage of. And really, the ego has an incredible fear of if I see the light or fully trust my light, I'm going to be persecuted, judged, or abandoned more often. And the truth is that when we lead with our light, we're actually more aware, which means we're aware of their higher qualities. We're also aware of where people are growing and where their imbalances are. And it's not a judgment, but when you lead with this light, when you're all for love and when you're love in action, you're actually more aware than you are when you're in a divided defensive state. So most people think if they're in a defensive state, they're more aware and more prepared for the incoming trauma, or they think that they can see it from a greater perspective. And then people are astonished to realize actually, when I'm in a place of heart centered consciousness, I actually have such a bigger perspective. I see it all coming from miles away. I have plenty of time to prepare to avert any damage. And what's amazing is when we lead with this type of mindset, you're actually helping the other person when they're with you to step into the highest version that they have access to. So if we really want to feel safe and connected, it's not about I hide in a state of judgment and division. And when it's safe, I come out to connect. It's if I learn to lead with this kind of connection, I'm actually going to manifest different versions of people. And even when they're not acting from their highest truth, I see it from a distance. I don't take it personally. It doesn't stick to me, and I
Mm.
actually have the awareness and the resources to communicate my needs and create boundaries. And it actually makes us safer, and it actually helps us heal our wounds, and it helps us all manifest a different version of reality for the benefit of all.
Yeah. What you're actually kind of saying is that you open yourself up with love and compassion,
Yes.
and as long as so you're both moving towards others and still having a bigger picture
Yes.
all at the same time.
Yes.
So uh, talking about the spiritual sphere where you are, I mean, this is your life. you
Yeah.
you work and live in the spiritual
Yeah.
field. Where in, I mean, we could go from psychology and
Right.
self-help to esotericism,
Mhm.
esoterics. Where on this, in this line are you, would you say?
The midpoint,
The midpoint.
meaning the bridge between esoteric phenomenon and, let's say, insight, which we could say insight is either psychology, we could say insight is the awareness we have as we go through awakening. So I was born with very activated psychic abilities, and yet I've gone through my journey of awakening, and so I have a very deep understanding of the psychology side of life, the mental insight, and then I also have living experiences of multidimensional phenomenon, and of course the midpoint between the esoteric realms and the, let's say, insight path The midpoint is the heart. The heart is the center of everything. And so everything I do that it represents really what all for love really means
Yeah.
is the midpoint between those things. Because when the path is too much in the esoteric, it's too archetypal, it's too symbolic, um, it's too circular, right? It's not definitive enough. And when we're in the psychological realm, which I think is very helpful, I'm a fan of holistic, right? Not one versus the other. But when it gets too mental and too concrete,
Yeah, you're too much in your head,
yeah,
perhaps.
it's too sharp. It's not, we need to soften those edges. So the two paths, in the same way that it's not about leaving your mind and going in your heart, it's actually bringing your mind and heart together, because we need our minds and we need our hearts. It's just they both function better when they're connected versus divided. So in the
Mm.
same way, I bring the esoteric and that psychological path, or self-help personal growth path. I bring those together because just like the mind and heart work the best when connected, these two aspects of a path are most potent when they're connected versus separate.
Mm. I totally agree.
Yeah.
I also love the holistic way.
Me too.
Yeah. So, who is this book for?
My goodness. Ah,
Everyone.
it is for everyone who is ready to move beyond a life of pain,
Mm.
overwhelm, fear. It is for those who desire reclaiming their power, knowing the depth of their divinity, and for those who want to return home to source
Mm.
without having to leave the body, right? This book is for those who want to have the most meaningful connections in their lives,
Mm.
for those who want to be able to stand in the purity of their authentic power. And when we look at the world going through all of the incredible changes it's going through, and we say, well, where is this new earth? For those who want to start living in the new earth and enter it right now, which is not separate from the earth we live in. It's not like a separate place to go. It's a
Mhm.
different level of consciousness. And so for those who want to live in the new earth consciousness, which I call heart centered consciousness, the new spiritual paradigm, for those who really want to experience relief and not just use the personal growth journey to just search for solutions to endless problems. But how do we actually move into a different side of reality where we start to just explore the purity of our light, and we start to experience the invincibility of our own infinite power? And so, for those of us that go, I just want to move to the other side of experiences, and I'm really ready to move beyond suffering and fear and despair and overwhelm. And I'm really tired of pointing the fingers at people who may hide from their pain by pointing them at me. And if
Mm.
we're ready for true heart centered transformation, this book, All for Love, is for you.
Yeah, kind of for everyone.
Yeah, I write it for everyone.
Yeah. So, what made you write it? I know that you wrote it in during the pandemic.
Yeah. I tend to write. I've been writing. So this is my fourth book. So I have been writing a book, one book a year. And I got in this flow of doing that. The pandemic was happening. It was during the time in the United States of the George Floyd incident that people around the world
Yeah.
saw. And when, and there's such a outcry for justice, and of course, systemic racism is such a important issue that we face and resolve. And before we can, people can really connect in a heart-centered way, people needed to express all of the anger that had been repressed. And so we saw a lot of violence in the world, a lot of displacement. And I was watching the world go through so much pain and express anger in such a violent way. And I thought, what could be a roadmap that unites the world as one, right? When living in a world that felt to me like I'd never experienced more of a divided world than during that time. And it felt as if people had no hope. And it felt as if people who were, very connected on their spiritual path were starting to kind of spiral and unravel. And I thought, what is the roadmap that no matter how divided we are as a world can actually bring us together and really start helping this planet birth unity? Of course, all the violence we saw is not separate from that, but how do we really bring not only humanity together, but how do we bring our personal worlds and how do we bring our inner self together as one?
Mm.
And so I wrote this book as my way of saying, okay, all these things are playing out and we're purging all this repressed anger. I get that. Totally get that. And as the dust settles and as the smoke clears, we're going to have to pick up the pieces.
Mhm.
We're going to have to, you know, we're going to have to move forward. How do we, as a spiritual community, as spiritual beings, and as a spiritually expanding world, how do we move forward together in more unity versus division? And so from that idea, this poured through me.
Thank you,
You're welcome.
pandemic.
Thank you, pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
We
was
do
great.
have a lot to thank it for, I think.
Absolutely. Oh, I
Yeah.
do too. I'm incredibly grateful. I mean, it was such, I mean, to look back and to see what we lived through.
Mhm.
Like, we can read history books and go, "Oh, wow, that happened. What
We were
was that?"
there.
We were there and it was surreal. And again, I don't think, there's nothing wrong with the experiences we have and certainly the way people were expressing their anger. I totally understood it. I totally understood why everything was happening the way it was happening. I really, really did. And I saw the spiritual invitation that it was moving people towards. It was just one of those things where it's like, okay, we're going through this right now, and there's going to have to be a map that leads us further once we get through this. And so it was like a premonition of like, as we move through this very deep, collective dark night of the soul, that's what I called this. We're going to have a map that leads us into a higher perspective. And so that's really where this came from. But yeah, I'm incredibly grateful for the pandemic times. And I think it gave a lot of people an opportunity to really connect with themselves, become aware of themselves, not just aware of the roles they play, where they're going, and all that stuff, but to
Mm.
really reconnect with ourselves. And I think we're living at a time where we can start to observe and really benefit from all of what that time gave us
Mm.
because the invitation, the gift is always given, but are we in a state of awareness to receive it? And so I think right now we're all just starting to become aware of what the opportunity was and how do we move forward in a way as the better versions of ourselves that that period of time was actually helping to reveal, even though for a lot of people it seemed very bleak and it seemed very
Yeah.
fearful because it was first you have to face what's within you before you can move beyond that and
Mm.
become a new version of yourself. So again, very grateful.
Actually, I've never, oops, I have never spoken so openly with so many people about personal transformation and growth as I did during the pandemic, because
Yeah.
all of a sudden people had time to reflect,
Yes.
and they needed to reflect because they felt bad, or they to just live through this time of isolation. I mean, we were in Sweden,
Yeah.
so I guess we had the best time in the world, perhaps. I
Right.
don't know. At least we were not isolated like in lockdown England and so on, where they actually shut down, playgrounds, so the kids could not play outside.
Right.
Yeah, which is, I don't know if it was the same thing in the US, but
Yeah. We had the lockdown. And I think that when you have a lockdown, which of course, it brings up a lot of
mm,
fears of confinement, or a lot of times people feel as if with less choices, they feel more imprisoned.
yeah.
But the equal opportunity is that when you have less choices, the equal opportunity as the opportunity to transform, to heal, and to move forward from your highest values can become more apparent because you have less options to avoid, to distract, and all these types of things. And, my heart goes out to parents who couldn't send their children to daycare or to school. And yet, when everyone's locked down in the house together, it helps us all become aware of the imbalances in our dynamics. And so, for a lot of people, they were inundated with the awareness of the problems that our day to day lives couldn't help us be distracted from. So now we're in a place of saying, okay, now that we are aware of imbalances or dynamics, how do we begin to bring healings to those imbalances so that as we're returning to a world, as things are opening back up, we can actually return to the world and reconnect as deeper, more meaningful versions of ourselves?
Mm, that's very true.
Yeah.
So today, then, what would
Yes.
you say? I mean, yeah. So I was wondering during this time, and then
Mm.
after this, we are finished with the pandemic. But during this time,
Yeah.
could you feel that you had a closer relationship to your audience? Did you experience them connecting to you more,
What I noticed,
online and stuff?
yeah, well, what I noticed was because, my in-person events stopped because of the pandemic, and instead we did more virtual events.
Mm,
And so it was, and I was regularly going on Facebook, doing Facebook lives, and I was trying to use social media as a way of connecting with people as often as I could because my intention is always, if something really big happens in the world, I want to be a guide for people finding their way through it.
mm.
And so it's kind of like being a member of the spiritual Red Cross. And so
Yeah.
when there's upheaval,
Mm,
I want to be on the front lines helping
yeah.
in every way that I can so that when the pandemic happened, we did more online events. And it just became my deepest desire and intention to connect and reach out to people as often as possible. And some people are on social media, some aren't. So we're just trying to find all the ways we can reach people.
Mm,
Because again, when something overwhelming, when something unexpected happens to us personally or collectively, we need guidance, we need support.
mm,
And my intention and my desire is always to move to the absolute front lines of what's happening. And so, like I know a lot of people who during the pandemic, they started baking and doing making bread, and that's cool. But for me, it was time to step into action. And
yeah.
that's just what I always do. And for me, I think it made my connection to my audience more meaningful only because I was so honored to be able to serve, especially at a time when things seemed flipped upside down. So it was just an incredibly meaningful time with me, and it continues to be because I think for me, the pandemic brought out an even deeper version of myself. And so I just now find myself, even though I was on the front lines helping people, I just kind of stayed in that place.
Mm,
And I feel like I'm bringing through even deeper teachings. I think I'm transmitting from a much more incredible place, even though it's always been amazing. It's just, I find myself just more enriched than ever before by my service. And I feel like what I'm offering has just been upgraded in such an incredible way.
mm. Yeah. I want to go back to the beginning of our conversation. You talked about the perfume that
Yes.
we send out. And I'm thinking you could translate that to an energy or so on. So when you're all in love, are when you are living for the
Mhm.
best of love, you have a perfume that smells
Yeah.
very good. But if you're not, if you do see all the obstacles and the negativity around you,
Mhm.
you also have a different energy, and your
Yeah.
perfume or your odor is
I
different.
like that. It's true.
But it is true. I normally when we talk about this in the office and with the friends and stuff, if you walk around feeling not very happy and you are just suppressed with heavy workload and negativity, you send that out
Sure.
around you, don't you?
Well, I think the fundamental thing that I think is the most palpable, like when you are in a state of, and again, so many things I want to say to this. It's important to always have the space to feel our feelings, right?
Yes.
So if we're sad, it's okay to feel sad. And I think sometimes people can take these teachings and they take them a little too superstitiously. And they say, oh, if I'm sad, I'm sending out the sad energy and I'm going to manifest more sadness. So then people are bypassing their emotions because
Mhm.
they're afraid of attracting more of the same. I think the difference is we can feel the depths of any emotion: sadness, fear, anxiety, loneliness, but it doesn't send a signal out unless there's something or someone we're blaming for the experience.
Yeah.
And when we blame, that's when we're projecting the energy outward. Typically, the energy doesn't help us manifest more of those situations. It just creates a viewpoint where if I am lost in blaming someone for my experience, it creates an it creates an energy where it's that much easier for me to continually blame other people for my experiences. And of course, if we've gone through trauma and abuse, yes, we were abused by people. Yes, we were. That happened. There's no reason to deny it, but there's a deeper level of healing where we say, okay, I didn't ask for this. I didn't create it. I didn't ask them to treat me this way. But here I am, the survivor of this trauma, and I have an opportunity to heal it. When we are shut down in our emotions and we are just lost in the false level of superiority of they did this to me and all that kind of mental thinking, it shuts down our mind to not be aware of other possibilities. So when I was a kid and I was blaming my parents for how unfair they were being, and they were being unfair, but when I would blame them for that in my mind and I would just constantly just soak and marinate and blame, I started to realize I'm actually closing myself off from other possibilities that can actually help me feel good, even when I don't feel good around these people.
Mm.
And so when we are in our egos in an unconscious way, it doesn't mean that it's not just feeling our feelings, it's using our feelings as mechanisms of projection and blame onto the people that we feel caused these experiences. And again, people do cause experiences, but our invitation is to say, okay, this happened. Am I going to shut down and use this moment to justify it? Or am I going to use this as an opportunity to transform myself? Am I going to accept the invitation of healing? Am I going to open myself up to higher possibilities? And sometimes people need a little time to get there, and there's no reason to rush the process. But I just want to be clear, and it doesn't mean that if you walk around feeling sad or ashamed, that you're going to manifest more of it. It's just the case that blaming others leads to blaming others. Healing ourselves leads to being the healed self, right? Hurt people, free people.
That's a good one. But how do you get there? So if you are in this situation and
Mhm.
you can see it, you can
Yeah,
see, okay, so I'm working up my mind
yeah.
about this person being um, mistreating me,
Mhm.
and I don't want to be there. So
Right.
how do you have a quick fix? So how can I
Yes.
break it? How can I break it?
So let's say you're in experience and you're feeling this person is mistreating me. This thing is unfair. or whatever the thought is. What you say to yourself as what's called a pattern interrupt, you're right. So imagine you were in the presence of one of your guardian angels and you said to your angel, this person hurt me, they mistreat me, and it wasn't fair. And the angel says, you're right. You're right. And then the person says, well, why did this happen? And the angel said, it happened to give you the opportunity to decide what you're going to do about it. So what we want to do is we want to move out of the injustice and unfairness and into inspired action. Well, how do we do that? Well, however you feel, and this is one of the qualities in the book, we validate.
Mhm.
I do this with people all the time in, professional settings in my personal life. I was sitting at lunch and this person did this to me, they did this to me, and then they're, threatening if I leave the relationship, they're going to take the kids. And I said, yes, this is what's happening. And they said, it's not fair. And I said, you're right. And they said, I don't like it. I said, I wouldn't like it either. And they said, well, what do I do? And I said, what do you think you should do? And they said, well, I think I wish I could do X, Y, and Z. Well, why aren't you doing that? Well, because I'm afraid. So why don't you do it with fear? Carry fear with you. Why don't you do it fearfully? And they just looked at me. They'd actually never thought of that. And they said, I think I have to work on the fear first. I said, that's not how it works. You have to actually move in the direction of inspiration with fear in your body. And the minute fear can't prevent you from making bigger choices, fear leaves your body. So we don't work on ourselves privately and then become superheroes. We become superheroes with the fear of smallness in our hearts, and then things transform. So when we have these circular thoughts of, they did this, they did that. Yep, you're right. Absolutely. And what happens is that the ego gets validated, that everything it's saying is 100% accurate. The question or the determining factor that divides victims from predators, from heroes, is what we do about it. And the book I wrote is what to do about it and how to move through it with the frequency of love. So if everyone watching this wants to resolve the pains of their lives and to allow love, the highest vibration, to do that healing, that's why I wrote this book, so that we can move forward in more inspired action, because everything that we will say and who we will blame is true. What are we going to do about it? And that's where things start to really open up.
Yeah. It's a jungle, though.
It is. And that's why we have to have guides through the jungle.
Yeah. Like you and our angels. So you are quite open with your relationship to your parents when you were young and so on. So when you found this way of turning things around with them, how has your from what I can read in your books, your relationship with your parents is quite good.
Yes, it is.
So how are they feeling about you being open with this, with your history, and also how did your technique or your way of dealing with it help your relationship?
So currently, both of my parents have crossed over and they live in heaven, right?
Oh,
Because of my abilities, I connect with them all the time. They visit me all the time and we talk about a lot of things. In fact, when I was writing this book, I talked to them from heaven and I said, hey, do I have your permission to tell these stories? How do you feel about that? And my parents were so beautiful. They said, we're so honored that anything we experience could be used to help other people. And so, but before my parents died, probably 5 years before they died, is when a tremendous amount of healing occurred between all three of us, my mom, my dad, and myself. It was at the time I was living with my parents still. I was healing from an injury. And I remember I was in the shower one day and my guides came to me and they said, in 5 years, your dad's going to pass away. And then shortly, a year and a half after that, your mom will pass. And I was in the shower. They were in the living room watching television at like volume 90 or something. And I bawled my eyes out spontaneously and I processed their death while they were in the other room watching TV. And for the next 5 years, I spent that time connecting with my parents who, in my experience, had already died and I had already processed their death. And so now this time was just extra. And in a lot of ways, it didn't really, they didn't really change how they acted.
Mm.
Especially after my dad passed away, my mom was really lonely and her physical illnesses, ravaged her body and she was confined to a wheelchair at the last, few years of her life. And, she had no one to control. And so her conditions and her behavior actually ramped up. It ramped up and got
Oh.
worse.
Mm.
My experience of both of my parents was so different because I had processed their death.
Mm.
And so I was experiencing them from a different perspective. Before both my parents died, we all had conversations and cleared a lot of the baggage and we healed a lot of things. And even after they both crossed over, and I was so grateful when my mom crossed over only because not like that, but my mom and dad spent every day together. And so when my mom was in heaven, I knew my parents were together again. And because watching my mom be separate from my dad was heartbreaking. Watching my mom, hold the hand, try to reach out and hold the hand of my dad while he died. And my mom didn't have use of her hand. So we put her hand on his hand, but she couldn't really feel it. And so here's a woman that is trying to reach out and touch her husband as he takes his last breath. And she is imprisoned by a body that is just breaking down. And watching my mom just kind of implode in her own control issues, watching that, seeing my mom as just as much of a victim of her conditioning as I was to her conditioning.
Mm.
And I say this in the book, I talk about this, that seeing that my mom was equally as wounded by her pain as I was no longer put us on opposing standpoints.
Yeah.
And watching my mom truly just implode by the imprisonment of her control issues manifested a level of forgiveness I had never known before that moment. And I
Mm.
talk about in the book how forgiveness doesn't have to be you decide to forgive someone. Forgiveness is a spontaneous grace that washes over us. And so I was grateful that at the end of my parents' life, I got to, spend time having course corrective experiences.
Mm.
And it didn't mean that they suddenly changed. It means that I changed. And we got to have conversations. We had to clear the air. And even as they visit me from heaven, which they still do to this day, we have conversations sometimes. And I really feel like all those wounds have been really healed. And when I felt like that healing was pretty complete, that's when I knew it was time to write this book. Because I wanted to be able to say, yeah, this was my experience, but this is how I also made my way to the other side. And here's how I healed myself without waiting for someone else to become different. I
Mm.
was the one that became different. And that's what actually transformed my relationships with them. And that's what's transformed my relationships with everyone in my life is that I'm not waiting for them to be different. I'm the one daring to be different. And I do that with love. And again, that's why this book is being circulated throughout the world so that everyone can become the difference that brings healing to their heart without waiting for other people to change first.
So, I mean, when you are feel mistreated, and perhaps
Mhm.
you actually are mistreated,
Yeah.
uh, many times there is a wave coming over us that we want to give back.
Yeah.
Okay, so we want the other person to feel the way we feel.
Right. Right.
So how that feeling, you have to get rid of that feeling somehow. How can
Mm.
you justify not giving back?
Well, I think we don't get rid of the feeling. Imagine feelings or emotional energy is like clay. And so we don't want to get rid of the clay. We just want to remold it.
Yeah.
We want to mold it in a different shape. So the way we do it, and again, the first time we do it, it will often sound ridiculous. But if we just try it a few times, it really softens the heart quite quickly. And this was just what I experienced. When I would be mistreated, and there'd be that feeling of vengeance, retribution, retaliation. Um, and again, all justified in the name of justice. Like, I have the right to get you
Yeah.
back. And even that part of us that gets fueled by, oh, I have a good reason. Oh, and I can act like a you know what, but I actually have a justified reason. The ego loves that. The ego loves having the right to act the way other people act, but with good reasons.
Mm,
It's a trip we wake up out of. But
mm,
the way we resolve it, and we can start slowly, the way I resolved it is every time someone triggered me and I was furious and I wanted to get them back, and this was when I was much younger, spontaneously, I would be inspired to say, may all of the dreams of this person come true. May all their wishes be granted. So, and may they be healed so no one else, including them, will be harmed in their presence. And I spontaneously realized that when someone hurts me and I'm praying for the salvation of their soul, and I'm praying and wanting for their desires to be fulfilled, it is such a radical departure from how people think.
mm,
And it literally brings you into an entirely different dimension. And it helps you to be able to get out of that retribution perspective and you start to see from compassion. It
mm,
wasn't okay that they did this. We probably need to have a conversation. I probably need to create boundaries. A few things are going to happen, but I can do it from the awareness that it's their hurt causing the pain. And so I'm going to speak to the pain
mm.
instead of verbally assaulting the person. And that's a great example of integrity. It
Yes.
doesn't mean we let things go and we don't have these conversations. It doesn't mean that at all. We still have the come to Jesus conversations. We still let people know how we feel. We let people know this is not okay. We let people know if it continues, I may not be able to be around that often. Like we really create a very clear way of communicating. But what we don't do is we don't get manipulated into lowering the standard of our conduct. Just because they hurt us doesn't mean we have a right to hurt them. And when you wake up in consciousness, you wake up out of the ego's almost bloodthirsty desire, where it literally on a subconscious level, not conscious, subconscious, hopes someone messes with me.
Mm,
So I have the right to act the way the ego wishes it had the right to act. And the deeper reason for that, because people hear that and they go, well, I don't want to be mean to people. What it is that when we are spiritual beings, we are not often in our power. We're disempowered.
mm,
And our earliest memories of power is being overpowered by others.
mm,
So as we grow up, we think the only way for me to be as powerful as I want to be is to act the way other people acted towards me. But I'm a nice person, so I have to wait for justifiable reasons to make it okay. As we learn to come into our power from a state of love, we realize there is no power in disempowering others. We realize that others who have disempowered us doesn't give the right to disempower them because the only one who's going to be disempowered by that choice is us.
yeah.
So we step into our power. And again, it might sound radically ridiculous, but when someone hurts you, you have the opportunity to either swirl in retribution, which means you're going to continue harming yourself, right? They ran out of poison to give you. So you're going to pour yourself a glass of poison and continue to poison yourself.
Mm,
Or you will purify your heart. You will reverse the karmic wheel,
mm,
saying, people who are nice to me, I pray that all their dreams come true.
mm.
People who are not nice to me need those prayers as
Awesome.
well.
Yeah.
And I pray for everyone's salvation. I pray for everyone's dreams to come true. And when I did this, I made it so ridiculous. It literally woke me up. It was so funny. Someone hurt me. And I thought, I pray for all your dreams to come true. And my stomach was all in knots. And my ego was like, what do you do? Oh my God, you're killing me. Then I made it more ridiculous. And I said, God, I said, make their dreams come true before mine.
Mhm.
They hurt me, let them cut in front of the line. Give it to them first because they obviously need something
Mm.
to break the cycle of harm.
Mm.
And it was so ridiculous to me. It was so like, in fact, I took the injustice and made it so much more like, I'm hurt. I didn't deserve it. And you can go in front of me and get all your dreams to be fulfilled. And for me, something in that was so purifying and nourishing. And it was my way of saying to myself, they can stoop to any level of unsavory behavior. I do not lower to that level ever.
No.
And it really shifted my life radically.
I can understand that because what you're actually doing at the same time is deciding that
Yes.
whatever luck they will have in their lives, it's not of jealousy. I
No,
will not be jealous because I asked for that to happen.
that's right.
Because otherwise, jealousy can also come in when you have that kind of relationship
Oh, yeah.
and you victimize yourself again.
Jealousy, bitterness, resentment, leading to righteousness,
Mhm.
entitlement, all the fun things.
Yeah, all the fun things. Yeah. So let's spiral up. It's
Totally.
Friday evening here, and you have a Friday morning, and you're going to cook some nice food today, you said. So
Yeah,
will it be chicken or beef or vegetarian?
it's funny. I go back and forth between plant-based and, eating meat, depending on what my body wants or what it needs. So, like, for example, so like it's Friday,
Yeah.
my weekend is beginning, and usually a lot of my friends live in different parts of the country. And I have friends around, but usually on the weekends, I just like to be at home, watch some shows I haven't caught up on. And I like
Mhm.
to cook all weekend. That's my fun. I cook all weekend. I cook from scratch. So like currently right now, my body is told me a couple days ago, we want a lot of cooling foods just to regulate my body temperature. So if I want cooling foods, I may have some chicken, some fish, but
Mhm.
I may not have a ton of red meat because that makes my body warmer.
Yeah.
And then I find myself eating red meat, of course, grass fed, grass finished, because every time I buy something at the store, I look at it like I'm making a vote. I'm voting for how I want the world
To see, to
to
be.
to to, to
Yeah.
operate. But I find myself, and a couple weeks ago, I went plant based for a couple weeks, and because I love cooking, it's no big deal for me to go from one to the other. It really is not a big deal. I tend to eat sometimes gluten free just because I think it's good to have space. And there are times when my body says, no, we can totally tolerate, bread and wheat. So I think for me, it's just about listening to my body. And so for this weekend, I describe how I cook as spa cuisine. So it's
Yes.
healthy, but it's delicious. It's sexy. It's just like if you went to a spa and you were like, whoa, look at this. And I just make very healthy, fresh, vibrant food. And when I channel my recipes, the energy that I channel when I'm speaking or when I'm writing goes into my food. So, like, for example, a couple weeks ago, I got sick. And even while sick, I cooked 3 to 4 meals a day from scratch because as I'm channeling the dishes, I'm putting healing and energy that's actually helping me heal. So this weekend's going to be a lot of fresh, light. Also, when I go to the store, I always buy 1 to 2 ingredients I've never worked with, and I study how
Mhm.
to. So, like this weekend, the theme is going to be tropical fruit. So I'm going to work with 2 different kinds of dragon fruit. I'm going to work with star fruit. I've worked with papaya. I'm doing papaya, some pineapple. I just decided a mango. I'm going to just do tropical, light, refreshing dishes.
We were in Zanzibar over we have the winter break a couple of months ago, and we ate exactly that kind of food. And it was, I mean, all those tropical fruits.
Yeah.
And you can actually go to the tree and pick your mango yourself.
I love it.
I
I love
mean, we're up here in the north. You
right.
understand? I mean, when I come to a place like that, it's like heaven for me.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that when we all learn to in all of the ways, like when we're making a meal,
Mm.
are we just consuming, which is what most people do is they consume food. But and in the future, I want to start combining my spirituality and culinary. I
Mhm.
want people to learn the difference between consuming food and tasting food.
Mm.
And I want people to understand how we can cook as an act of love.
Mm.
How can we show the ingredients the highest level of respect? Because when we look at an ingredient, whether it's a piece of fruit, whether it's a nut,
Yeah.
how much effort and how much life force energy and how many people's lives went into getting this ready for you
Mm.
to receive. And so when we learn to cook, we are honoring with gratitude and gratefulness the effort that life put into this, whether we're plant based, whether we're carnivores, because the rule of life is that everyone gives their life to another.
Mm.
I give my life in service of humanity. We're all giving our lives to our children, to our communities, whatever it is, our
Yeah.
careers. And so when we cook, we are honoring what life has been given or what life has put into preparing something for our benefit. And when we cook like artists, we want to derive the greatest amount of value and appreciation from what we are receiving. And so we learn to taste versus consume, just like in the spiritual path, we learn how to live versus exist.
That's very true.
Yeah.
So I want to wish you a fantastic weekend, and I would love to be at your table tasting your food.
Yeah, one of these days, absolutely. When friends come and visit me, it's very common for people to join me at my kitchen counter, and we talk and catch up as I cook, and I cook for people, and it's like a little show. And in the near future, I'm going to start doing cooking videos
Nice. Yeah, you should. It
because
would
it's a
be
show.
awesome.
I have a little show, and I love cooking for people. I love like even when my friends come over, and I had friends come over, and I did a 5 course tasting menu because I like doing tasting menus, and I did a completely plant based tasting menu that no one knew was plant based until
Oh,
the end when I we were talking about it. Like no one knew it was plant based because I don't do any meat substitutes. I use only pure food ingredients. And when you cook in a certain way, it's not like, "Oh, that's good for, like, vegetarian." It's just amazing.
mm.
And, you know, even when yeah, even when I go out to restaurants, I often order plant-based because I just think it's the most interesting thing on the menu. And
It takes the
it's
chef. Takes the chef to make it right.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So, yeah, so come on over one of these days, and, we will all enjoy and really everyone has a place at the table. And isn't that great? A great metaphor for life that we all
Oh,
belong here.
yeah.
We all may eat different foods, but we all can share in that together. And I think that also cooking is one of the greatest ways to bridge gaps between cultural differences, that we learn about things we don't understand
Mm.
through the beauty of food.
Yeah. I love food too. I love to cook, but I need the inspiration.
Yeah.
The everyday thing is not my thing.
I get it. I get it. I totally get it. And, the more time we spend in the kitchen, you build that endurance. But I get that. I mean, there are days where I cook usually 3 or 4 meals a day from scratch. And there are days where I just go, I'm going to go out or I'm going to order out. But the majority of the time, I like to just make small plates several times a day. And I got very used to it. And then when you can cook like that, and you go out to a restaurant and it's like, it's good, but
Yeah, but it's not so.
it's not what you're doing. And then you go, "Oh, wow. Okay. Well, I'm just gonna go to the best restaurant which exists in my home apparently." And then I have friends that come over that go, "Matt, can you cook?" And I was like, yeah, okay. I mean, I love it. And there's something so deep that when you cook a meal for someone you love and you watch someone you care about, friend,
Yeah.
lover, when you watch someone completely in ecstasy eating something you cooked, there
Yeah.
is something so gratifying and fulfilling about that. That's like giving a Valentine gift to your beloved and watching them fall even deeper in love with you. It is such a personal thing. And
Yeah.
I just love it.
Of course. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I hope that you get that this weekend. And I wonder if you have anything you want to say to your Swedish audience with this third book of yours before we hang up.
Well, to my beloved Swedish audience, I love you all so much. And thank you for embracing these teachings. Thank you for shining your light. And thank you for being heart centered. And I just want to say to all of us, we are all shining our light, even when we're not aware of the light we shine. We're all heart centered people, whether we perceive our actions and choices to be heartfelt or not. And that at the core of our being, we are the love, the light of the universe. It's not a matter of how much you have to get rid of first before you can shine brightly and be the love that you are. It's just remembering a light that is always within you. And it's embracing an aspiration to want to move in the direction of love instead of remain hidden in defensiveness. And as we, throughout our lives, throughout the experiences that happen to us, and through the inspiration of many things, including this new book, All for Love, that I've written, as we allow ourselves to reconnect with the purity of our being and to remember that the only thing that's going to make life make any sense, the greatest justice, is when we take anything that's happened to us and we invite love to be its healer. And so, my greatest intention is for all of us to ask love to be our healer. And the book, All for Love, that I wrote is a roadmap to invite that healing into your life. And I love you all.
And we love you, Matt. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It was lovely speaking to you again.
It was very lovely. You're wonderful. And I'm excited to go cook. And I really loved our exchange. It was beautiful.
Yeah, it was. So, see you again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe in person one of these days.
Yes. Now we can fly.
Exactly. So we'll figure that out. But again, thank you so much. And what a great honor. And I hope you eat something delicious this weekend.
Yes, I'm going home. I think my husband cooked for me.
Awesome. We'll enjoy.
You too. Bye-bye.
Take care.
You too.